Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the MD of Arrows Group, and it's a series aimed at STEM graduates where I am interviewing chief people officers, heads of talent, CTOs, people who have had senior leadership roles within high-tech, high-growth businesses that have something relevant and have a genuine interest in our STEM listeners. So I'm really pleased to have Mira Magecha with me today. Mira is the former Chief People Officer at JustEat, has a really interesting career background from both HR through to large consultancy, through to JustEat, where, as anyone knows, one of the fastest growing tech businesses, and is now an exec director and advisor on a number of student platforms. So really relevant to today's conversation. So Mira, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we were just discussing, we're running around your house, getting a nice look, getting ready to jump into the office for this show.
Yep, we've got to get ready.
Yeah. I think we were talking about it's the home working balance, and especially if it's co-sharing of just being able to be agile to even at home, isn't it?
It is. You've just got to be able to move around and do what works for each of you that's in the house. And move around and share space and kind of not listen in on conversations and move upstairs, downstairs. And it also means that you're moving around while working. So, there are some advantages.
Yeah, super important. So, Mira, the first question I ask all our guests is, I'd love to know a bit about your story, how you got into HR, but also how you came through to working within technology businesses.
So I'm one of those really unusual people who decided to study the HR world, and I did my first degree in HR, and then I carried on doing my MA for all my sins into HR as well. So clearly at the age of 16, when I was making choices, or 17, or however old you are, many moons ago, making your career choices, I chose HR. And then fortunately for me, I did actually enjoy it and then stayed in that field ever since. Although I did have a blip at one point going, oh my God, is this what I've got to do for the rest of my days? Which is, I'll talk about in a second. So I joined a number of businesses and I did 2-year stints at a number of them before I kind of found my calling. And this was when I left HR, or what I believed to be HR, and went to a consulting organization, still focusing on employee transformation, employee change programs, but supporting people on a much wider context of the people element and change, leaving the line HR role behind. I did that for a number of years and then went on to work for myself for a little while and then joined JustEat. So the tech experience really is from JustEat. I had some experience through my consulting days, but it's really the JustEat world that I joined and really understood that pace of change, how technology enables businesses, and how the consumer, the customers have really changed what they expect from technology. And I still get surprised by that today.
Yeah, and that's brilliant, actually, isn't it? Because you've seen both sides of the industry. As many of our listeners come from a STEM background, and so by nature, thinking about tech businesses would probably be the natural progression. But what were the key differences from your experience working in non-tech and tech, good and bad, when people are entering that as a job market?
It's just really different, and it's not that one is less fast paced or the less sexy. It's actually just different. So there's traditional businesses out there that still expect high quality, high caliber individuals and still want that graduate intake. But at the same time, you've got what is perceived to be that fun culture when you go into a tech business. You've still got the pool rooms, you've got the PlayStations, you've got all of the gaming side of it. But the reality is, in both of those worlds, you're working equally as hard and working on equally interesting projects. So don't be persuaded just to do the technology business, because actually there's a lot of good value that as a graduate in the STEM world that you can add to traditional businesses as well. So it's not just the technology business, although I understand why that is such a big attraction, especially as one of the things that we found at JustEat when I first joined 5 years ago was the age profile was super young of a tech industry, and that's just because that's what it is. And then over the years it changes and it adapts, but generally speaking, the natural age of the industry is relatively young.
Yeah. And again, seeing that firsthand myself, it comes with its own advantages and disadvantages, I guess, doesn't it? Having to manage cultures, and with youth comes ambition and willing to adapt, but I guess learning from others and actually thinking about longer careers can maybe sometimes be a challenge.
And that's probably one of my pieces of advice just generally, which is you've got to have that balance of team. And so regardless of it being a technology business and being a new startup business, for example, having some level of experience across the board is really, really valuable, rather than just having all new fresh blood. Because as a graduate, and I remember this when I was a graduate, it's really great learning from people, learning from the experience. And yes, I can use a textbook. Yes, I can read as much as I want. But actually, a lot of my learning is through doing it day in, day out on the job. And so don't underestimate or undervalue that side of learning and developing through any role that you do, be it in any organization.
Yeah, great. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That learning and being part of a team and having the diversity in a team, not just on age, but on all factors, isn't it? So, or
Absolutely.
experience. And so I guess, because knowing Just Eaters, as well as we both do, they've been on their own journey. What was some of the key initiatives or things that you're really proud of in the growth? You know, because it's a phenomenal business. So what were you able to embed that really made a difference there?
I think there's been a few surprises along the way in terms of the level of change, the level of growth. I joined Just Eat a year after they IPO'd, so they became a public listed business. And so it was a different journey that we were on compared to a much smaller startup business. So this was about growing, having some of the adolescence pains, and growing up as a business. So with the FTSE business comes some governance, or becomes additional governance. And so how do you keep that culture of the business whilst also growing up? How do you ensure that while you're recruiting, you're still keeping to the core of who we are as a business? How do you do that when initially you're in a room and your story and your growth journey is about a group of individuals in a basement in Denmark versus we're now a 4,000 people business? How do you keep that story going? How do you keep that ambition, that entrepreneurialism continuing? And that's what's fun, and that's what's the challenge. That's partly fun, but it's also a challenge in terms of how you do that. And how do you create graduate programs, for example, that mean that you bring in this new talent, you bring in this new blood, especially from STEM, in our technology world or even our data world, and then also ensure that they're getting the development, the growth. They're understanding that it feels still quite like a startup. So we still had our pool tables, we still had our PlayStations, but yet we still had EBITDA and revenue targets. We had that KPI driven business. So how do you match both of those things up? That was one of our big challenges in terms of from a people point of view, and ensuring that we were hiring the right people, bringing in the right type of experience, but bringing in experience, because that was vital to the growth of what we were doing at the time.
Yeah. And again, super relevant when you're thinking around, and that last part of what you just said around when recruiting and looking at the blend, the culture, the type of people coming in, even if the business is going through a journey, and how you keep that culture. Any advice then? Does that trigger to any other thoughts of advice? Again, thinking back to graduates who are looking at scale up, looking at companies who have just gone post IPO even, and advice for them and thinking about what they could do to best make an impact?
I think being a graduate in today's world is actually really challenging, because we expect, in terms of employers, a lot from them. So we want them to have experience. So when I talk to graduates and we're hiring for graduates, I'm not just interested in their academic background. I'm interested in what's important to them. What makes them who they are? How do they bring the diversity into our thinking, our ways of working? How do we adapt to a younger generation, or how are they going to adapt to working with an older generation, etc.? What are they interested in? So it's all well and good going, I studied electrical engineering, but what does that mean? What do you want to do with that? How do you want to change the world? How do you want to fundamentally change how people order food? Because that's what Just Eat ultimately did. And so think about what your personal interests are, as well as how that then links to an organization that you're interested in joining. Talk about that during that interview process, because it's fundamental in terms of why I would potentially have a conversation or pick you versus other candidates who are equally as good, have the same kind of academic background, but actually what drives you apart from other candidates. Think about your strengths, your weaknesses, the moments that you're proud of. When were they? Why were you proud of them?
Yeah.
What were the things that you overcame to achieve those things? Because at this point, you don't necessarily have a ton of experience in the world of work. So we're looking for personality, commitment, characteristics, the cultural fit into an organization. And I would say that that's important across pretty much all tech businesses. They sometimes hire for personality, characteristics over skills and experience, especially at the graduate level.
Yeah. And actually, that's been quite a common theme of many of my guests, where traditionally, and especially in technology roles, people who studied engineering back in my day and beyond, the communication skills weren't actually something that was important or essential. That's probably been the thing that's evolved most when looking at today's hiring and graduates entering today. As you've just said, that actually a lot of businesses, and not even just tech businesses, I think a lot of the world now has evolved to say that communication and culture and diversity, and there's a number of factors that now complement just the academic or the technical skills.
And it's so true, because I remember when I graduated, you almost had to fill in your A-level results, and based on that you got filtered. Whereas I hate that kind of filtering, because you lose the diversity, you lose the individual personality of graduate programs and the purpose of why you bring in young, fresh talent into an organization. And so for me, it's really important that for any organization I work in, they actually view you as a whole person, not just your academic qualifications. And so for me, it's not necessarily going to a red brick university, and that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that whole, because we are, and more organizations are thinking about how do we bring in more diversity. And I don't mean diversity in terms of the characteristics that the UK kind of portray. It's more the widest characteristics. How do you interact? How do you like to converse? Are you an introvert? Are you extroverted? What's your communication style? How do you prefer to be managed? All of those things are what's important, and fundamentally graduates kind of bring that in as we kind of develop a culture as we go through their career and their lifestyle.
Yeah, and you are right, that's diversity on a wider spectrum and those communications. And so thinking about, again, JustEat being such a strong brand name, I can imagine the applications that the internal recruitment teams must have been in their thousands at times. Any advice on how our listeners could stand out, or anything a little bit out of the box that would probably get them to the top of the pile when wanting to approach, a business similar to JustEat or many others, I guess?
Be you. That's my biggest piece of advice. And given that we are in this restricted world and we're all working from home, etc., one of the things that I've seen more of is individuals being them. So there isn't this facade of I've come into the office and this is who I am and this is my work me and this is my home persona. Actually, we're one person. And so you get to see the inside of my home, you get to see the artwork, you get to see what's around us. And so find a way of bringing that you to your CV, to your video. And don't get me wrong, if someone said I had to do a video CV, I'd be like, oh my God, don't do this to me. But actually, that's probably part of the way of the future to some extent. But actually bring some of that personality onto a piece of paper. Talk about the things you like. So even for experienced hires, for me, one of the first sections I go to is what's their personal interest? What do they do outside of all of this great work that they've done? And sometimes people leave it off, but actually I want to know who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. So bring that in. But also as you're going through the whole process, sometimes you can go through an interview and go, something's not quite right, but I'm going to ignore that. Don't ignore it. Use your gut to help you define and decide if that's the right role, because a process is a two-way process. It's not just for them to like you, it's also for you to go, is this right for me? Is this going to fit with my values? Is this going to fit with who I am as an individual? Is this going to work for me? And actually, sometimes use your gut, not just the data of going, this is one of the best organizations I could possibly join and it's going to be right, but my gut's actually telling me it's not quite right for me, but I'm going to ignore that. Sometimes you have to follow your gut. It's not just all about the data. And then once you're in the organization, ask questions. I remember when I joined JustEat, and again, I was a Microsoft person. I only use Microsoft forever. Coming to JustEat, it was a Google profile and system, and I was just like, oh my God, I don't know how to use this. And so from a really basic point of view is fundamentally, I almost felt like my arm had been chopped off because I was like trying to operate a Google system, and that was Google Mail, Google Word, Google Docs, sorry, not Word, Google Sheets, the whole thing. And I was just like, I don't understand how to use this. And so ask the questions, and I'm using a really basic example, but ask the questions, because actually continue to learn and people want to know that you're interested. And then my last piece of advice is probably most relevant for graduates, because it's about the patience. You're not going to be the CEO in the next 2 years. There's a growth journey that you have to go to. And it goes back to my earlier point of we hire for experience as well as personality characteristics, etc. But as a graduate, we're interested in you as a person, but you have to be patient. You're on a journey. Yes, you are probably highly educated, and yes, you have all the academic qualifications, etc. But be patient, because you are doing this, especially in your first post-grad role. This is probably the first time you're doing some of these things. So be patient with that growth journey. Don't expect all of it to happen overnight.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And what a brilliant last piece of advice as well, because there was a podcast actually. We released it today where this really inspiring chap, Hendrik, he talked about how you shouldn't exchange time for money. You should exchange time for knowledge, i.e., use your time to learn, not just chase a paycheck. And I think that's sort of similar to what we're saying here on the patience line is learn, take the time to really hone your skills. Don't always be chasing the next thing if you haven't really taken everything you can from the situation you're in, I guess.
And also there's a great load of learning to do, whereas if you fast track some of that, you get to the point where you're leading this team, but actually you also don't have the experience of doing so, but you fast track your way there. So then every day becomes a greater and bigger challenge than had you spent 3 years doing something versus I'm going to do it in 2, because that year, be open to that learning, be open to the experiences. It's absolutely not about the next promotion, because sometimes you get over promoted and then you're in this position and you're constantly going, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. So just learn, take the time to absorb, and also through that observing place and absorbing place, you're actually also going, I like these aspects of the job and these are the aspects I don't like, which may help you narrow if you want to become a specialist in certain areas as well.
Yeah. And again, what brilliant points, because I think they're all so relevant. And you know, summarizing this up, because can you believe it? It's flown by the time as always. You know, what I've taken from this conversation, and especially for our STEM listeners, is the BU, ask questions and patience. You know, they're the 3 takeaways, you know, that I think from this conversation. What brilliant advice to prepare yourself for that journey, because it is tough. Like we said, like you said at the beginning, it's tough for graduates in today's world. We expect a lot from people. So standing out and not feeling that pressure, I suppose, is a 2-way street. Companies and employers need to be looking at things beyond the academic results, and people need to want to stand out and be authentic, I guess.
Yep, absolutely.
So Mira, thank you so much. I hope that was okay. You enjoyed the podcast?
It was amazing. Thank you. It was very, very quick. You did warn me that we'd be done very, very quickly. So thank you so much for your time.
Brilliant, and it flies by. So to everybody listening, it's another Future Tech podcast series. The series can be found on arrowspodcast.com. That website's also embedded in our 16 partner universities, and the audio podcasts are on Spotify, Apple, and Google Play. So for now, it's another episode of our Future Tech, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.